Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're putting on our detective hats and diving into a really fascinating challenge to how we think about heart disease. We're going to investigate an alternative theory based on the work of pathologist Professor Vladimir Subotin that questioned a core belief that's been around for more than 50 years.
All right, let's just jump right in with the big question. For decades, the story of what clogs our arteries has had one main villain. But what if that whole story is wrong? What if the evidence has been pointing to a completely different culprit this entire time?
So to really get to the bottom of this, we have to start where it all happens. We've got to visit the scene of the crime, the inside of a human artery. And we're looking at one that's been clogged up by what we call atherosclerotic plaque. This, right here, this is the physical evidence at the very heart of our mystery.
Now, for as long as most of us can remember, the case seemed pretty open and shut. Mainstream science had its prime suspect, low-density lipoprotein. You know it as LDL. The thinking was that LDL is an invader, right? It's this particle in your blood that just forces its way into the artery wall and kicks off the whole horrible process.
Okay, so let's break down the official story of how this crime supposedly goes down. It's a theory that has absolutely dominated cardiology for generations, and it's known as the inside-out hypothesis. It lays out a very specific, step-by-step sequence of events.
And this quote really shows you just how rock-solid this view became. Decades ago, after some major consensus meetings, the idea that cholesterol gets in from the bloodstream, from the lumen, was basically locked in. It became the unquestioned truth, the foundation for pretty much all research and treatment that followed.
So the official story is pretty straightforward, kind of like a four-step process. Step 1, you've got LDL particles floating around in your blood. Step 2, they sneak past the inner lining of your artery. Step 3, they get trapped in the wall right behind that lining. And 4, that buildup kicks off a chain reaction that can lead to a heart attack. It's a simple idea. It all starts from the inside and works its way out.
But just like in any good detective story, a piece of evidence turns up that, well, it just doesn't fit the official story. It's a little detail about the crime scene that makes you stop and question everything you thought you knew.
So for this whole inside-out story to work, the LDL has to get across that inner wall, the intima. And if you look at countless medical diagrams, this space is almost always shown as this thin, kind of empty area, basically an easy target for invasion. But is that what it really looks like?
Well, it turns out not even close. The source material shows that in an adult coronary artery, the intima isn't some thin little layer. It's a dense, complex structure that's about 30 cell layers deep. It's actually one of the fastest cell-reproducing tissues in the body. So it's not an empty room, it's more like trying to get through a dense forest.
And this right here, this is the central problem with the official story. See, autopsy studies show that the very first signs of that cholesterol buildup, they don't show up near the bloodstream where the LDL supposedly entered. No, they appear in the deepest layer of the intima, as far away from the blood as you can get.
This brings up a huge question for our investigation, right? If LDL's invading from the inside, how in the world does it travel through 30 layers of dense, active tissue without leaving a single trace, only to get trapped at the absolute furthest point from where it started? It's a clue that maybe, just maybe, the attack is coming from a completely different direction.
So that baffling clue opens the door for a totally different explanation, one developed by Professor Subotin that just flips the entire narrative on its head. It's called the outside-in hypothesis.
Now, to get this new idea, we have to introduce a new character into our detective story, the vasa vasorum. These are tiny little blood vessels that actually feed the artery wall itself, but they do it from the outside. You can think of them as the arteries for your arteries, bringing in oxygen and nutrients to keep that big vessel wall healthy.
So, here's the crucial part of this alternative story. The problem doesn't start with an invasion. It starts with an injury, some kind of damage to the artery wall. This damaged tissue then sends out distress signals. It's calling for help. In response, those vasa vasorum, they grow inward from the outside to deliver supplies for repair. But here's the catch. These new, hastily built vessels are leaky, and they end up depositing their cargo, including LDL particles, right into that deep layer of the intima, exactly where the first signs of trouble appear.
This completely reframes LDL's role, doesn't it? In this version of the story, LDL isn't the criminal who breaks into the house. It's more like a passenger in an ambulance that got called to the scene of a fire. The real problem isn't the LDL, it's the fire, that initial damage that triggered the whole emergency response in the first place.
Which of course leads to the next logical question. If damage is the first step,
What's causing that initial damage? If LDL isn't starting the fire, then who or what is? Well, the source material gives us a list of the usual suspects.
So, who are the real culprits? Well, according to this theory, these are the things that actually start the crime. Things like high blood pressure, insulin resistance, high blood sugar, smoking. These are the factors that injure the artery wall and create the crime scene to begin with.
And this analogy just hits the nail on the head. Of course you're going to find cholesterol at the site of the plaque. It's a critical part of your body's repair system. Blaming it for the damage is literally like blaming a paramedic for a car crash. The paramedic is there because something went wrong, not to cause the accident.
And there's data from the source that seems to back this up. Just look at this chart. The first bar shows that having high LDL by itself doesn't do much to thicken the artery. But look at that third bar. When you combine high blood pressure with high LDL, the problem gets way worse. This suggests that LDL is more of a risk multiplier, not the root cause. It pours gasoline on the fire, but it doesn't actually start it.
So, what we're left with here are two totally different ways of looking at the exact same cardiovascular crime scene. The evidence, the plaque in the artery, is identical, but the story of how it got there is completely different.
This table really sums up the whole debate perfectly. Is LDL the villain that starts the fire, or is it just fuel that gets thrown onto a fire that was already burning? The orthodox view says lower the number of LDL particles, no matter what. But this alternative hypothesis says no, that's not enough. You have to find and put out the original source of the fire, those root causes of damage.
And that's really the final, provocative thought this whole scientific challenge leaves us with. It shifts our focus from just targeting a single suspect to understanding the entire environment of the crime itself. Because if this alternative hypothesis has real weight to it, well, it could fundamentally change our entire strategy for fighting one of the biggest killers in the world.